For years, Samsung smartphones were the perfect showcase for Microsoft's strategy. Embed OneDrive into Android, quietly route photos and files through Microsoft's cloud, and rely on Samsung's hardware to do the heavy lifting. On stage, Samsung and Microsoft executives smiled. The media called it seamless, users called it convenient, and Microsoft called it a win-win. In 2026, that win-win turned into a breakup. Samsung did not just reduce OneDrive's role, it did not just hide it in settings. Samsung cut Microsoft out of core consumer experiences on over 100 million Galaxy devices and quietly signaled that it will never look back. This is a deliberate and strategic move to rip OneDrive out of the default backup path for Samsung phones and replace it with Samsung's own cloud, Samsung Cloud. If you own a Galaxy phone, this change is already affecting how your photos and data are being stored, and you probably have no idea just how big this shift really is. On many Galaxy phones, you may have seen a small banner in the Gallery app, Sync with OneDrive ending soon. After April 11th, 2026, Gallery will no longer support syncing with OneDrive. No big press release, no dramatic keynote, no viral tweet storm. Just a quiet, firm deadline that quietly rewrites how Samsung handles your photos. Behind that line is a massive operation. Over 100 million Galaxy devices lose OneDrive as the default backup option. The Gallery app stops pushing your pictures to Microsoft servers. Samsung shifts the default path towards Samsung Cloud, which is being rebuilt and expanded to absorb the load. For years, Samsung had pushed users away from its own cloud service and toward OneDrive, framing it as the more reliable, more powerful option. Now Samsung is doing the exact opposite. Users who relied on OneDrive as their automatic photo backup wake up one day and realize that their photos are no longer syncing. They check settings, they panic, and they start asking questions they never expected to ask. Where are my photos now? What should I do with the data already in OneDrive? And why is Samsung forcing me to switch? This is the result of Samsung finally deciding that it no longer wants Microsoft sitting in the middle of its core user experience. The story is simple: control. Samsung is the largest Android OEM in the world. Its phones are the default Android devices for hundreds of millions of people. Samsung also has its own TV, tablet, watch, and IoT ecosystem. Over the years, Samsung tried to compete with Apple by building a cohesive ecosystem, but without a strong cloud backbone. That's why Samsung initially partnered with Microsoft. OneDrive became the default cloud backup layer for Samsung Gallery. Samsung effectively outsourced its photo and file backup stack to Microsoft and shut down its own Samsung Cloud service. The logic was clean. Microsoft has massive cloud infrastructure. Microsoft has a huge engineering team. And integrating OneDrive into Galaxy phones would be easier than rebuilding Samsung Cloud from scratch. In practice, it became a nightmare. Users reported inconsistent sync. Photos would fail to back up for hours or days, and battery drain increased when Gallery chatted with OneDrive. Restore operations sometimes failed. In some cases, users found their photos missing or duplicated after a sync run. The support burden fell on Samsung, even though the underlying cloud was Microsoft's OneDrive. At the same time, Microsoft's own AI and Copilot strategy started pushing Microsoft in a direction that made Samsung nervous. Microsoft's cloud is not just about storing files. It is about AI models, analytics, advertising, and cross-service integration. Samsung began to worry about how much of its users' data was feeding into Microsoft's AI engines without Samsung's full oversight. When Samsung pushed for more transparency, more control, and clearer boundaries on data usage, Microsoft did not always bend. Samsung realized that Microsoft's priorities were not aligned with Samsung's. Microsoft's top priority was Microsoft's ecosystem. Samsung's top priority needed to be Samsung's ecosystem. That's when Samsung started the long-term plan to bring Samsung Cloud back, rebuild it, rebrand it, and reposition it as the default cloud layer for Galaxy devices. The end of the OneDrive integration in Gallery is the public face of that plan. Samsung is saying, in no uncertain terms, we will not outsource the core cloud layer that connects our ecosystem anymore. From now on, Samsung Cloud is the default, Samsung controls the pipeline, and Microsoft is a third-party option, not a built-in partner. If you are a Galaxy user who has been using OneDrive as your primary backup for years, this change is a big deal. Your photos are safe in OneDrive, but they are no longer being automatically added there through the Gallery app after April 11, 2026. The AutoSync, feature that quietly pushed every new photo to Microsoft servers, is disappearing. You now have three basic choices: move to Samsung Cloud, switch to another cloud provider, or keep OneDrive as a secondary option. This move is about Samsung's long-term war for ecosystem control and its desire to finally stand on its own, without leaning on Microsoft. For Microsoft, this is more than an inconvenience. It is a strategic blow. Over 100 million Galaxy devices are losing OneDrive as the default backup. That does not necessarily mean those users will delete their OneDrive accounts, but it does mean Microsoft is losing a massive, automatic, always-on distribution channel. This is also a warning sign to Microsoft's other partners. If Samsung, the largest Android OEM, the most powerful Samsung entity, the one that helped Microsoft build its Android inside Microsoft narrative, can walk away from a major cloud partnership, anyone else can too. Samsung's move is a part of a much bigger story in the tech industry. Over the past decade, we saw a wave of cross-platform integration. Android and Windows talk to each other. iPhones and Macs synced with iCloud. Google and Microsoft edges of each other's ecosystems. The idea was that users wanted seamless experiences regardless of what brand they used. That idea was not wrong, but it was incomplete. The reality is that the most powerful companies are increasingly unwilling to cede control of their core services to anyone else. Apple will not let Microsoft own iCloud. Amazon will not let Google own its cloud storage layer. Meta will not let Microsoft own its social data pipeline. And now Samsung is making it clear that it will not let Microsoft own its photo and file backup stack. The result is ecosystem fragmentation. You no longer have one universal cloud that works for everything. You have Apple's iCloud, Microsoft's OneDrive, Google's Drive, Samsung's cloud, and a growing list of independent services. These ecosystems wants to be your default. Each of them wants to lock your data inside their own walled garden. Samsung is making a long-term bet. The company is investing billions into its own cloud infrastructure, its own AI models, and its own ecosystem. Samsung is not trying to be a Microsoft inside Android OEM anymore. Samsung wants to be a platform owner, not a hardware purveyor. This shift explains why Samsung is rebuilding Samsung Cloud, why it is integrating tighter AI features into One UI, and why it is pushing Samsung devices and Samsung Health as central parts of its ecosystem. Samsung is trying to create a seamless experience where your phone, your watch, your TV, your laptop, and your cloud all talk to each other in a way that feels like one unified system. If Samsung succeeds, it will have built the closest thing to an Apple-style ecosystem on Android. If it fails, it will be stuck in the middle, not different enough from Google's ecosystem, not attractive enough, compared to Apple, and still dependent on partners like Microsoft that may not always have Samsung's interests in mind. Samsung is confident enough in its long-term trajectory to risk short-term friction. Samsung is confident enough to tell 100 million users that yes, this change is disruptive, but it is necessary for a stronger, more secure, and more user-centric ecosystem. This story is a warning to Microsoft and to every other big tech company that thinks it can quietly own the cloud layer of another giant's devices. Microsoft needs to listen. Microsoft needs to understand that partnerships are not permanent. Microsoft needs to understand that its partners are powerful companies with their own ambitions, their own brands, and their own ecosystems. Microsoft needs to stop treating every integration as a one-way street and start treating it as a two-way relationship. Samsung is the first major partner that has done this in such a visible way. The rest of Microsoft's partner network is watching and learning. The story of Samsung ditching Microsoft's OneDrive is a sign of how the future of your data and your devices is being shaped. You will no longer have one universal cloud that works for everything. You will have multiple ecosystems, each with its own cloud, its own AI, its own rules, and its own priorities. You will have to choose which ecosystem you want to anchor your life to. You will have to decide who you want to trust with your photos, your files, your messages, and your health data. Samsung is giving you a choice. You can stay in Samsung's ecosystem and let Samsung Cloud be your default. You can move to another cloud provider and keep your data more open and cross-platform. You can keep OneDrive as a secondary option, but never again as the invisible automatic pipeline that quietly owns your photo backup. No matter which path you choose, one thing is clear. You cannot treat cloud storage as a background detail anymore. You need to understand where your data is, who owns it, and how it will be used. You need to be intentional about your backups. You need to be conscious about your ecosystem choices. Samsung's decision to ditch Microsoft and bring OneDrive out of the core backup path on 100 million devices is a wake-up call. It is a sign that the era of just let it sync is over. The new era is one where you have more control, more choice, and more responsibility. Samsung is cutting Microsoft out, and it is never looking back. The question for you is, where will your data live now, and who will you trust with it?